The story of March was a month of quantity, but not necessarily the quality of the months prior. I usually save the numbers breakdown before I jump into the individual matches, but this was the first anomaly of its kind since starting the series. In total, I watched 319 matches spanning 12 promotions, or 13 if you count the All-Star Junior show as its own thing, but I digress. There are many reasons for this increase in volume. Ring of Honor launched its weekly TV series, the New Japan Cup tournament took place, and most if not every promotion besides WWE ran a pay-per-view event. WrestleMania weekend also kicked off over the last 2 days of the month. This all resulted in a much broader pool of matches to select from, but most of it was just fine. Not great, not bad, just very much okay. A lot of those major events like the New Japan Cup or the big events from each of the cyberfight companies just necessarily didn't click with me. There isn't anything wrong with that either, and I was bound to experience some inconsistencies when documenting an entire year of my favorite matches. If this is your first time finding my videos, here's some terms and conditions as to how I go about doing this. First, it's obvious I will not have seen every single match take place. Time and money are finite things, and I have some major blind spots compared to other channels, blogs, or podcasts. With the sheer volume of matches this month, I missed a few Mania weekend shows and some independent stuff, most notably the 16 karat gold tournament. Second, favorite and best are different things, and my favorite matches may differ from, say, something critically acclaimed by Wrestling Observer newsletter. It's not a top 10s or a hidden gems type thing either, it's really just the matches I enjoyed the most. And last but not least, a spoiler warning for match finishes. Despite my prior complaints, there still were a handful of great matches to find this month. Here are some of my favorites from March of 2023. We begin at March 4th's Triangle Derby final with the Wonder of Stardom Championship match. This sits in the middle of 3 very good singles matches on the night, just after Himeka vs. Chihiro Hashimoto, and just before Azumi and Starlight Kid add another entry to their eternal rivalry. Saya Kamitani enters the match as the record holder of successful defenses of the white belt, though in recent months she hasn't quite hit the level of quality that established her dominant reign. Opposing her is Hazuki, a woman of few words, though speaks up when she feels it's absolutely necessary. She demanded a title shot from Saya and even pinned her twice in the lead up to this match. This made another Saya defense feel like a foregone conclusion, though no match against the Wild Heart is ever easy. Hazuki's style combines the best of the high-speed division with uncompromising intensity. Expect a lot of forearms and a lot of kicks to the face. Saya cannot afford to be on cruise control at any point of this match, and is forced to go blow for blow, including a sequence of strictly pump kicks. Hazuki would either get the very best out of Saya, or finally claim her very first white belt. This match is a consistent exchange of bombs that escalates in aggression and urgency. Neither can seem to put the other away, despite the final act of the match being on a nice edge the entire time. The crowd is extremely hot for this one as well. Saya would ultimately survive, hitting back-to-back Star Crushers to add to her historic reign. I think what this match accomplishes is getting Saya back to where she needed to be before the big match with Mina Shirakawa, and she leaves looking like a killer in the process. I thought both played their roles incredibly well, especially Hazuki, and I hope she'll get more opportunities to shine in these big matches. In the context of the work itself, it is very much a moves match, and I can understand that criticism, but sometimes it's okay to just sit back and enjoy the fireworks. This does have me very excited for the match with Mina, and as for March, I would also suggest anything from the Himeka retirement road, as well as the New Blood Tag Team Championship final. If you've seen my previous videos, you'd once again expect Bryan Danielson to occupy a spot on this video, but with the way I go about making them, rewatching a 65-minute match multiple times just wasn't in the cards. I thought they did a good job of keeping it interesting, but I'd rather not give anything but a full-fledged opinion on it. This brings us to Texas Death. After making honorable mentions list 2 months in a row, this pairing's bloodbath at the Revolution pay-per-view gets its very own entry. I'd like to preface this with the fact that I'm not someone entirely well-versed in deathmatch. The extent of my experience outside of AEW is the Jun Kasai El Desperado match from last year. If this is something that isn't for you, there are timestamps in the description to skip ahead. The stipulation is treated at the feud ender it maybe should have been, as Moxley insists Page cannot survive. Hangman enters to prove what type of competitor and what type of man he truly is. So how do you accomplish this in a setting of blatant extreme violence? Well, I think the answer is in steady escalation with a bit of shock value. Jon Moxley is the one to gradually introduce each weapon into the match, even if he doesn't get to use them first. To Moxley, this is simply his dominion, and he attempts to establish this by first incorporating the use of barbed wire. Naturally, though, he's the first one to take it and bleed. Soon after, a fork is introduced, and it's probably the most shocking visual of the entire match. Silverware and the like is nothing new in this environment, but the visual of blood spraying onto Moxley in a mainstream pay-per-view setting is as grotesque as you could probably get. With that precedent set, they're still able to make the more ordinary moves look crazy. Moxley's King Kong lariat towards the end of the match looks like it hit like a train, and the usage of something like a back rake, something that rarely comes off as a genuine threat in a wrestling match, looks absolutely disgusting here. Woven in between all this madness is a well-paced demolition derby. Much of the more athletically impressive spots break up the slow burn of the bloodletting sequences, and for a 26-minute death match, I think it's actually balanced quite well. A brick-assisted head stomp later, the two start throwing haymakers out of desperation. Moxley places a steel chain on his shoulders to stabilize his weight this late into the match, only for it to be his ultimate undoing. He's suspended over the top rope with no choice but to tap out. Jon Moxley tapped out, and that may be the most effective way to get their point across. One of AEW's most dominant and protected wrestlers submits within his own element to get his ultimate comeuppance, with Hangman Page leaving vindicated. This one is certainly not for the faint of heart, but it is one of the more visually striking matches you'll ever see, just due to the sheer insanity of it. Is it their best match? Well, that's all dependent on your taste, and I wouldn't blame you if you find more merit in something like their January Dynamite match. It is, however, an exhilarating spectacle of violence and a fitting end to their blood feud. Honor is back, and for the most part it's been pretty good. The Honor Club weekly TV show has given a dedicated home to Ring of Honor's champions, most notably Athena, who's ramped up her intensity as a heel in recent months. Most of her previous work were squash matches on AEW Dark. While I do think she is a great squash match wrestler, this new dedicated platform gives the opportunity for something maybe a little bit more fleshed out. She defends her Ring of Honor Women's World Championship in the main event of episode 2 against a Willow Nightingale who has quickly been on the rise. Willow is a natural babyface, carrying an infectious positivity with her to the ring, but don't let her awesome demeanor fool you. She can slug it out with the very best of them. You have all the ingredients here for a hard-hitting match rooted in classic babyface and heel dynamics, and that's exactly what you get. Athena targets Willow's shoulders and arms, utilizing everything at her disposal to follow through on her game plan, be it focused strikes, holds, slams, or the use of her environment. Commentary points out her creativity from this perspective, primarily when she traps Willow's arms into the ring steps, though instead of slamming her into the steps right away, she stretches the opposite shoulder into the ring post. I can't remember seeing something like this done recently, and it looked insanely painful, though Willow is able to mount a comeback on the outside, but once they get back into the ring, the damage sustained is far too much to pull off a Dr. Bomb, giving Athena the opportunity to take over. An O-face shortly after leads to another successful defense for the fallen goddess. My brief description of the match doesn't do justice as to how mean everything is here. Both competitors absolutely lay in, and I think their characters are great foils for each other. I hope this pairing is revisited in the future because it really is my favorite match in these early days of this new Ring of Honor series. A year and a half ago, Kota Ibushi was injured in the G1 final after a Phoenix Splash gone terribly wrong, and at that time I would have never expected to see him competing in a no-ropes match in a Ukrainian hall in Los Angeles. Though Ibushi was never the conventional wrestler, so I guess this is very on brand for him. He stands across from Speedball Mike Bailey, looking to once again be the highlight of WrestleMania weekend. And with both men's background in martial arts, the prospect of this match seemed very intriguing. It really is one of the more unique matches I've covered so far in this series. This one is a little bit of a departure from the shoot style associated with Josh Barnett's Bloodsport, though it doesn't suffer for it, and adds a little bit of a different flavor compared to the rest of the card. After some preliminary mat work and submission attempts, Ibushi takes a headfirst spill to the outside, and we see a glimpse of his notorious murderous trance. The next bit is appropriately dedicated to each competitor kicking each other as hard as they can. Ibushi finds a way to do his second rope deadlift German suplex without any ropes at all, which then leads to a Regalplex Kamigoye combination for a swift knockout victory. It's a short and sweet display, running at just under 7 minutes. Maybe not something that'll be on a match of the year list, but the sentiment and feel-good factor is what elevates it for me. It's simply just a lot of fun and a welcome return for the Golden Star. I thought Bloodsport 9 was a very fun start to the weekend in general, and if you're into the more shoot-oriented stuff, I highly recommend the main event between Timothy Thatcher and the namesake of the show, Josh Barnett. There are people much more qualified than I am to discuss this match, though this was my favorite of the whole weekend and probably for the whole month. I thought Supercard of Honor as a whole was a great success, providing a little something for everyone and establishing the major story arcs for the year to come. One of them will most definitely be Eddie Kingston's pursuit of honor, which formally kicked off in the main event against longtime rival Claudio Castagnoli. Speaking of the more qualified people, I highly recommend checking out Joseph Montecilio's retrospective of this rivalry, as well as the Countdown to Supercard of Honor special, both found on the Ring of Honor YouTube page. These videos are not just great companion pieces to flesh out the past of both men, but the promos themselves and the hype package were not featured on the TV show. Entering this match, Eddie Kingston knows he has to out-wrestle Claudio in order to win. In previous feuds as seen on AEW, Eddie has prioritized getting his pound of flesh rather than the victory. But that simply won't be enough here. He has to outright win. He has to practice self-control in the face of someone he cannot stand. He has a game plan of taking out Claudio's left knee, and in the early going of the match he succeeds. A great deal of damage is done to Claudio, though as the match wears on, the bombs begin to fly. Even if this match is ultimately about Eddie Kingston, Castagnoli is no slouch. He's the more naturally gifted of the two, and as the match gets more desperate, he has answers for everything the Mad King throws at him, be it his vicious uppercuts or relying on his incredible strength. His newfound heelish edge isn't overbearing, though he does resort to some tactics he normally wouldn't, like weaponizing the barricade at ringside or verbally berating Kingston before the finish in order to catch him off his game. It ultimately comes down to a slugfest, and this is where Eddie abandons his strategy. Claudio reverses Eddie's Hurricane Rana pinning combination out of a Ricola bomb to scrape by with the victory. This was fantastic stuff. Similarly to Sami Zayn in last month's video, Eddie Kingston made me believe. I was hooked the entire time, and the things like the 1 count out of the neutralizer truly convinced me it was his moment. To borrow an analogy from team sports, on the day, Eddie Kingston was just good enough to break your heart, though the story is far from over. I highly recommend this match and the card itself, and at least Katsuyori Shibata walked out a champion. And as always before we go, just some honorable mentions I didn't touch on in the previous entries. Tanahashi and Okada versus Ren Narita and Shota Umino from March 6th. The Dream Team pushes around the young guys, and another great performance from this perpetually annoyed version of Okada. Meiko Satomura versus Roxanne Perez from March 8th. My favorite WWE match of the month, as a lot of their focus on main roster was clearly not on the in-ring product. This has a great student-mentor dynamic here, and also really stressed the fact that Meiko is still a force to be reckoned with. Daisuke Harada versus Atsushi Kotoge from Noah, March 9th. A 1-minute grappling exhibition as Harada is forced to retire due to injuries. It's an emotional send-off for the young master against his longtime tag team partner. Timothy Thatcher versus Wheeler Yuta, also from March 9th in Ring of Honor. All the technical prowess you'd expect from these two, as well as Wheeler really shining as a conniving heel to take full advantage of the pure rules. Blackpool Combat Club versus Dark Order from the March 15th Dynamite. Just a fun 6-man tag enhanced by a really hot crowd in Winnipeg. Ryuki Honda and Shotaro Oshino versus Issei Onitsuka and Takanori Ito from the All Japan GLEAT crossover show. I went into this one pretty much blind except for what the GLEAT guys had to offer, and I don't really have much prior knowledge of Wrestle 1, though I thought this went incredibly hard. Additionally, I recommend the Strong Hearts versus Anichi Shin Jidai main event from the same show. It's just a really fun all-star tag in a way that a Japanese promotion knows how to deliver. Kaito Ishida versus Kazuma Sakamoto from GLEAT version 47. Some are calling this the best match in the short history of the championship, and while I may not necessarily agree, it's still pretty good, and free right here on YouTube. And last but certainly not least, both of Kenny Omega's singles matches on Dynamite. Two very different matches, but both are worthwhile, though there's been enough discourse regarding the Vikingo match that there isn't really anything I could add to it. I do think the Jeff Cobb match offers something maybe a little bit more methodical if the nature of the Vikingo match just isn't your thing, though I really liked both. And that's it from me. If you got this far in the video, thank you for your time and for hearing what I had to say. Please do all the obligatory YouTube stuff and find me on Twitter at OuterStevan. Let me know what your favorite match from March was in the comments below. If I missed something completely, I'd love to see it. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next month.